Have you ever noticed that the moment a man stops talking, truly stops, the world does not grow quieter, it grows more alert, as if something powerful has entered the room without asking for permission. There is a certain gravity in a man who does not rush to fill the silence, a presence that expands not through words, but through the calm certainty that he has nothing to prove and nothing to perform. Imagine this for a moment. A crowded room, lights dimmed just enough to reveal the outlines of people, but not their intentions. Voices overlap, some loud, some shaky, some desperate, each one fighting to be heard, each one reaching outward, searching for validation in the noise they create. Men laugh too loudly, speak too quickly, interrupt each other without listening. Everyone is talking, because everyone is afraid of disappearing in the silence. And then, he walks in. Not the loudest man, not the most decorated, not the one trying to make an entrance, but the one who understands that a man's true strength does not come from sound, but from stillness. He steps into the room without urgency, without haste, without the need to announce himself. And yet, the energy shifts. Conversations falter for half a second. Eyes turn. People feel something, someone, entering their space, not because he demands attention, but because his silence commands it. In this world, there are three kinds of men. The first talks to impress, to decorate his insecurity with words. The second talks to teach, to offer what he has learned to those willing to listen. But the third, the rarest, the most dangerous, is the man who speaks only when necessary, who chooses his words the way a warrior chooses his battles, who understands that silence is not emptiness, but precision, not avoidance, but mastery. He knows the truth most men overlook their entire lives. Silence is not the absence of noise. Silence is the presence of control. A man like this does not stay quiet because he lacks thoughts. He stays quiet because he is watching, observing the currents beneath the conversations, the tension behind the smiles, the motives hidden beneath the polite exchanges. He sees what others miss because he has trained himself not to react, but to read, not to rush, but to absorb, not to defend himself, but to understand the terrain he walks upon. This is the kind of presence that makes people rethink their words before they speak. This is the kind of energy that turns mystery into influence. And this is the kind of man you feel drawn to become, not because he commands the room, but because he commands himself. If this speaks to something deep inside you, if you sense that your power has always lived in restraint rather than noise, then you're already walking the true Stoic way. Stay with me, subscribe if you haven't, and step deeper into the brotherhood where men are not judged by how loudly they shout, but by how completely they master their silence. There is a moment in every man's life when he realizes that intelligence is not shown through how much he says, but through how much he does not say. A shift happens inside him, subtle at first, almost invisible, like the tightening of an inner muscle. He begins to understand that every word he releases costs energy, every reaction exposes emotion, and every explanation reveals a piece of himself that cannot be taken back. And in that realization, he discovers the first foundation of true masculine intelligence. Silence, not the silence of avoidance, not the silence of weakness, but the silence born from discipline, the silence forged through inner control, the silence that says, I choose what deserves my voice, and what does not, because silence, at its highest form, is not passive. It is a deliberate act of emotional mastery. It is the mind saying to the heart, stand still. Let me lead. When a man can stay quiet in moments where others would react, defend, justify, argue, or lash out, he reveals a depth most men will never reach. He shows that his center is anchored, not easily moved by provocation, temptation, or ego. This is why silence is the first sign of an intelligent man, because only a man who understands himself can afford to remain still when the world tries to shake him. On the other hand, loudness, though it may look confident on the surface, is almost always a mask for insecurity. Men shout because they fear they won't be heard. Men overtalk because they fear their ideas won't stand on their own. Men rush to respond because they fear what silence might reveal. Noise is often nothing more than panic disguised as passion. The Stoics understood this long before modern psychology could explain it. Epictetus said, "Speak only if it improves upon silence," not because words are bad, but because most words spoken without restraint come from impulse, not wisdom. And impulse has destroyed far more men than ignorance ever did. Even neuroscience supports this ancient truth. Human beings subconsciously evaluate strength not through speech, but through emotional steadiness. A calm face under pressure, a composed breath in tension, a man who does not flinch when tested. These signals travel deeper into the brain than any confident speech ever could. The nervous system recognizes stability as power, and silence is the outer expression of that stability. But the real beauty of silence lies in what it does to others. When you stay quiet, you create a space, a psychological vacuum that pulls truth out of people. They begin to reveal their intentions, their fears, their insecurities, their motives, simply because your silence makes the noise in their mind louder. They speak to fill the gap, not realizing that in filling it, they expose themselves. That is why power always belongs to the man who sets the emotional tone in the room. Not the one who speaks first, or the one who speaks the most, but the one who decides the rhythm of the interaction. A man who can hold silence without breaking it forces the world to match his pace. He dictates the atmosphere without uttering a single word. And this is the paradox. The less you speak, the more powerful your presence becomes. Because silence, when chosen consciously, is not emptiness, it is authority. It is intelligence disguised as calm. It is strength wearing the quietest mask possible. For thousands of years, the Stoics warned men that the most dangerous weapon he carries is not a sword, not his fists, not even his intellect, but his tongue. Because the tongue, unlike a blade, cuts both outward and inward. It can destroy another person, but more often, it destroys the man who wields it without discipline. Seneca wrote that, "A man's tongue should be his servant, not his master." Epictetus taught that silence is the only state in which a man can truly hear his own reason. And Marcus Aurelius, arguably the most powerful man of his time, understood that the more authority a man has, the fewer words he needs. To them, speech was not a casual act. It was a moral responsibility. From the Stoic perspective, a man's tongue is the ambassador of his mind. Every word you release represents you, defines you, exposes you, and shapes the way others perceive the strength or weakness within you. If your words are careless, rushed, emotional, or scattered, then so is the impression you leave behind. But when your words are measured, intentional, restrained, and precise, you radiate presence without trying. This is why the Stoics compared words to arrows. Once released, they cannot be recalled. The arrow flies where it wants, not where you later wish it had. A careless sentence, an impulsive reaction, a confession given too early, a truth revealed to the wrong person. All of these things, once spoken, cannot be undone, corrected, or reclaimed. Modern men, however, have forgotten this ancient wisdom. We live in an age where noise is glorified and restraint is mistaken for weakness. Men are taught to communicate more, say everything, express constantly, as if endless words could somehow create connection or authenticity. But the truth is the opposite. Most men talk themselves out of respect, attraction, opportunity, and even peace. They sabotage themselves through over-explaining, believing that justification equals understanding. They weaken themselves through oversharing, offering pieces of their inner world to people who have not earned the right to hold them. They drain their presence through over-communicating, texting paragraphs, over-talking, filling silence out of fear. And worst of all, they reveal their instability through emotional leakage, exposing every feeling, fear, and insecurity the moment it arises. Each of these behaviors erodes masculine strength. Each one dilutes mystery, collapses tension, and hands away power. A man who cannot control his tongue cannot control his frame. And a man who loses his frame loses everything that makes his energy magnetic. The Stoics knew this. They understood that the tongue is the gateway between the inner world and the outer world. If the gateway is left unguarded, chaos spills out. But when it is governed with intention, silence becomes a fortress, and speech becomes a sharpened tool, rare, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. The intelligent man speaks only when his words carry weight. He talks not to react, but to reveal clarity. And because he chooses his words with precision, he never needs to repeat himself. His silence commands attention. His speech commands respect. Silence affects people far more deeply than they admit. And for women, its impact is even more profound because they do not listen the way men listen. Men tend to hear words. Women tend to feel energy. A woman reads emotional temperature the way others read expressions. And before a man speaks a single sentence, she has already absorbed the steadiness of his presence or the instability beneath it. That is why a man's silence, when it comes from calm control rather than passive avoidance, carries an emotional weight that words simply cannot match. When a man remains composed and quiet, he creates a space that invites interpretation. She senses the depth beneath that stillness, the restraint in his reactions, and the certainty in the way he holds himself. This unreadability doesn't confuse her. It awakens something instinctive, because the feminine psyche is naturally drawn toward what it cannot fully map. A man who reveals every thought loses his edge, but a man who chooses what to reveal and what to keep within becomes someone she must feel her way through rather than analyze logically. And this process, this emotional discovery, is a powerful driver of attraction. Mystery is not a performance. It is the natural result of emotional containment. When a man does not overshare or over-explain, a psychological tension begins to build. This tension is not unhealthy. It is the same mechanism that makes a story compelling or a moment unforgettable. Neuroscience shows that the brain produces dopamine when it anticipates meaning without immediately receiving it, and silence creates that anticipation. A woman begins to lean forward, imagining what lies beneath a man's calm surface, and this projection draws her deeper into the interaction. Predictability, however, kills attraction the moment it appears. When a man becomes emotionally transparent too quickly, when every insecurity is exposed, every feeling announced, every reaction predictable, her imagination shuts down. The unknown becomes known, the mystery dissolves. And without mystery, there is no spark. A man may believe he is building trust by sharing everything, but trust built through overexposure is unstable. It eliminates the polarity that keeps the dynamic alive. This is why a calm man destabilizes a chaotic mind, not because he is controlling her, but because he refuses to be controlled by the emotional turbulence around him. His silence reflects her energy back to her, creating a moment where she feels her own reactions more clearly than his. Women often test men, sometimes consciously, sometimes instinctively, not to break them, but to understand what grounds them. Does he react emotionally? Does he crumble under pressure? Does he rush to defend himself? Or does he remain centered, breathing through the storm without losing his balance? When she throws a test in his direction and he responds with stillness, a steady gaze, a slow breath, a thoughtful pause, she realizes she cannot shake him. That realization does not frustrate her, it earns her respect. A woman does not admire a man she can emotionally destabilize. She admires the man who stands firm, not with stubbornness, but with inner certainty. And in those moments, silence becomes a form of strength, more compelling than any explanation he could have offered. His calm says, "I am here. I see what's happening. And I choose how I respond." This emotional independence does not create distance. It creates safety. It reassures her that she is with someone who will not drown in the currents of her emotion or collapse under the weight of her expression. Silence, when used with intention, becomes an anchor. It is not a wall, not a dismissal, not a refusal to connect. It is a signal that he refuses to be moved by noise, that he processes before reacting, and that he trusts his own judgment enough to let the moment unfold without rushing to control it. In a world where most men talk themselves into weakness, the man who masters silence becomes unforgettable, not because he withholds, but because he carries himself with a steadiness that invites trust, fascination, and respect. There comes a moment in every man's life when he realizes that strength is not measured by how much he reveals, but by how selectively he reveals it. The modern world encourages men to be open, to share everything, to communicate endlessly, to expose their hearts as if vulnerability were a currency that would always be rewarded with empathy. But the reality is far less romantic. The truth is that not everyone deserves access to a man's depth, and the men who learn this late often pay the highest price. The Stoics understood this long before the language of psychology existed. A man's privacy is not a wall, it is a form of wisdom. What you protect shapes what you become. What you reveal shapes what others do with you. And in relationships, especially with women, the things you choose to keep sacred often decide whether you are respected or diminished, admired or pitied, desired or taken for granted. There are 4 kinds of truths a man should guard, not out of fear, but out of mastery. Not because he is hiding, but because he understands that some truths, once exposed, turn into leverage in the wrong hands. 1. His deepest weakness. Every man has a soft spot, a fear he has not conquered, a longing he has not fulfilled, a wound that still pulses beneath the surface. These weaknesses are not shameful. They are simply part of being human. But when revealed too easily, too soon, or to someone who has not earned that level of access, weakness becomes currency. And currency, in emotional dynamics, can be spent against you. Women test boundaries not to break men, but to understand the limit of their emotional stability. A boundary test is a way for the feminine instinct to assess the strength of a man's frame, whether he is guided by his values or swayed by impulse, whether he stands in his truth or collapses under pressure. When a man reveals a deep weakness without discernment, he disrupts this instinctual evaluation. She suddenly holds information that shifts the balance of emotional power, and whether she intends to or not, she now has access to a region of him that should have remained protected. This does not mean weakness should never be shared. It means weakness should be shared with intention. Intelligent men reveal their vulnerabilities only after they have processed them, refined them, and transformed them into lessons. They do not hand their open wounds to someone they barely know. They wait until emotional trust, consistency, and loyalty have been proven. Consider the man who confesses his deepest insecurity in the early stages of a connection. He believes his honesty will deepen intimacy, but instead, he dissolves tension, collapses polarity, and unintentionally reveals the exact emotional pressure point that can later be triggered. But consider another man, one who acknowledges his weaknesses privately, conquers them internally, and speaks of them only when the time is right. His vulnerability becomes wisdom, not exposure. And wisdom earns respect where raw weakness often does not. 2. His private struggles. A man's struggles, especially those related to stress, finances, loneliness, or internal battles, are sacred territory. The masculine burden has always been the weight a man carries silently while he works through his own chaos. Not because silence is weakness, but because pity kills respect. When a man exposes his struggles prematurely or excessively, he shifts from being a figure of strength to a figure of emotional dependency. And once pity replaces admiration, polarity collapses. The Stoic perspective is simple. A man should suffer privately, transform the pain internally, and speak about it only after he has found clarity. Struggles are meant to be conquered first and articulated later, not broadcast in the raw state where they inspire sympathy rather than respect. This does not mean living without support or pretending to be invincible. It means choosing the right time, the right audience, and the right level of disclosure. Intelligent men understand that speaking about a struggle too early turns the struggle into performance rather than progress. They repair themselves behind closed doors and return to the world composed, not perfect, but grounded. 3. His next moves, plans, goals, strategies. Few things sabotage a man's future as quickly as speaking about it too loudly, too soon. Ambition exposed becomes a target. Plans spoken before execution attract envy, interference, and unnecessary noise. In a world where comparison, jealousy, and sabotage operate quietly beneath the surface, a man who reveals his next moves before acting invites chaos into his trajectory. There's also a psychological cost. When a man talks about what he intends to do, he gains the illusion of accomplishment without any real progress. The mind rewards him prematurely, draining the energy required for actual execution. This is why the Stoics lived by the principle that results speak louder than ambition. Quiet progress is progress protected. Loud ambition is ambition weakened. Your goals do not need to be announced. They need to be pursued. Only a fool believes that sharing his plans makes him more committed. The wise man understands that secrecy sharpens focus, protects vision, and allows results to arrive unchallenged. 4. His emotional wounds. Emotional scars are not decorations. They are the blueprint of a man's soul. But not everyone is qualified to read them. When a man reveals his emotional wounds too openly, he confuses vulnerability with exposure. Exposure invites interpretation, judgment, and comparison. And in relationships, it often invites the loss of masculine polarity. Women may care deeply, but caring does not erase instinct. When a man bleeds too easily, too often, or too early, a woman's subconscious begins to doubt his capacity to protect, lead, and stabilize the emotional space around them. Emotional containment should not be mistaken for emotional suppression. Suppression denies, containment directs. A man who contains his emotions is not avoiding them. He is honoring them, processing them, and expressing them only when they have been understood. Your emotional wounds are sacred. They are not intended to be displayed like open pages of a diary. The right woman will earn the right to see them. The wrong woman will use them to shape you into something smaller. In the end, the power of a man lies not in how much he shares, but in how wisely he chooses to share it. Depth is not meant for everyone. Mystery is not manipulation. Privacy is not fear. These are the foundations of self-respect. And the man who guards these 4 secrets does not become distant. He becomes unshakable. We are living in an age where exposure has replaced discernment, where sharing has replaced thinking, and where the loudest man is often mistaken for the most honest one. Social media has created a culture in which silence feels unnatural, privacy feels outdated, and restraint is viewed almost as a sign of emotional dishonesty. Men today are encouraged to speak endlessly, to disclose their fears, their wounds, their desires, their insecurities, all in the name of communication, as if unfiltered openness were the highest form of strength. Yet the more they share, the less they understand what true strength actually is. Oversharing did not begin as a flaw. It began as a misunderstanding. Modern men confused honesty with exposure, believing that sincerity requires confession and that authenticity demands emotional nudity. They were told that if they opened every door in their inner world, others would admire their courage. Instead, they discovered a harsher truth. What is fully revealed is rarely valued, and what is too accessible is rarely respected. A man who reveals everything, his thoughts, his fears, his next moves, his emotional turbulence, slowly dissolves the tension that makes him compelling. The feminine instinct, which is naturally attuned to emotional rhythm, senses predictability long before the man realizes he has lost his edge. When she can anticipate every reaction, decode every insecurity, and map out his emotional landscape with perfect clarity, the polarity that once drew her in begins to collapse. Attraction withers not because he changed, but because he became entirely predictable. And predictability, in masculine energy, is the beginning of emotional irrelevance. Oversharing strips a man of the very qualities that once set him apart: his restraint, his focus, his mystery, his selective vulnerability. The more he speaks, the more he leaks. The more he leaks, the more he weakens his presence. Emotional leakage becomes a habit. Long texts sent in moments of insecurity. Explanations offered where silence would have spoken better. Confessions given to someone who has not earned them. Each leakage drains a portion of his masculine polarity, leaving him exposed in ways that do not deepen connection, but erode it. The psychological cost is even deeper. When a man externalizes every emotion, he loses the ability to internalize and refine his own inner world. Instead of processing feelings, he broadcasts them. Instead of mastering tension, he unloads it. Instead of developing emotional discipline, he becomes dependent on the reactions of others to regulate himself. And a man who depends on external validation for emotional clarity inevitably loses both respect and authority, not because he is weak, but because he has surrendered the privacy that once protected him. Oversharing also disrupts a man's relationship with his purpose. When he narrates every ambition, every plan, every intention, he disperses the energy that should have fueled execution. He begins to talk more than he acts, to explain more than he builds. In trying to prove sincerity, he dilutes impact. In trying to feel understood, he becomes ordinary. At its core, oversharing is not a communication problem. It is a containment problem. A man who cannot contain his emotions cannot contain his power. And a man who cannot contain his power cannot maintain polarity, direction, or presence. This is why the men of depth, the men of discipline, the men of genuine inner strength, speak with intention and reveal with precision. They understand that a man loses value the moment he becomes too predictable, and that the greatest parts of a man, his vision, his ambition, his inner resilience, are not meant for public consumption, but for private cultivation. At the core of every healthy attraction, whether people have the language for it or not, there's a quiet dance of polarity. One side reaches outward, the other receives and reflects. One side holds, the other flows. In its simplest form, this dynamic can be understood as masculine and feminine. Masculine energy is rooted in stillness, direction, and containment. Feminine energy is rooted in expression, movement, and emotional expansion. When these two forces meet in balance, something powerful comes alive between them. A tension that is not chaotic, but charged. Not unstable, but vibrantly alive. The trouble begins when this polarity is reversed, not because of fate or compatibility, but because of habit, especially the modern habit of oversharing. In a world that glorifies emotional broadcast, many men have been trained to believe that constant expression is a sign of maturity, that voicing every feeling is proof of honesty, and that being real means having no filter between the heart and the tongue. Without noticing it, they begin to live in a state that is fundamentally opposite to masculine stillness. Instead of holding their emotions, they spill them. Instead of creating safety, they seek it. Instead of standing as a pillar, they become a fountain. The feminine instinct, which is naturally expressive, will always fill whatever emotional container is present. When a man holds his frame, she can relax into her own expression without feeling burdened by his instability. But when he overshares, when he floods the space with his anxieties, doubts, fears, and raw emotional turbulence, she is forced into a role she never truly desired, that of the emotional caretaker. At first, she may respond with empathy. She may listen, comfort, and encourage, because women, by their nature, are often generous with emotional support. But as this pattern repeats, something subtle begins to shift beneath the surface. Her respect, which once flowed naturally toward his steadiness, starts to erode under the weight of a responsibility she did not consciously choose to carry. A woman cannot admire a man she has to emotionally carry. The moment she feels that he needs her to regulate his mind, stabilize his moods, or constantly reassure his worth, the polarity between them begins to collapse. She moves out of her natural feminine expression and into a more masculine posture, managing, advising, soothing, correcting, sometimes even leading. He, in turn, slips further into the expressive, uncertain, emotionally dependent space that he has mistaken for intimacy. This inversion is why oversharing is so destructive. It does not simply reveal too much. It repositions the man. Instead of being the mountain, he becomes the weather. Instead of being the frame, he becomes the painting. Instead of being the ground, he becomes the tremor. And once this shift happens, attraction slowly bleeds out of the relationship, often without either person fully understanding why. Women may start testing more, not because they enjoy conflict, but because part of them is searching for the man's lost center. They may become more controlling, not because they seek dominance, but because they no longer trust his ability to steer. They may begin to mother him, reminding him, rescuing him, worrying for him, because his energy no longer signals self-sufficiency. On the surface, it may look like closeness, like deep emotional connection, like two people sharing everything. But underneath, the dynamic has changed. She is no longer standing in front of a man she can lean into. She is standing next to someone she has to hold up. Masculine polarity is not about pretending to be invulnerable or hiding all emotion. It is about containing what you feel long enough to understand it before you speak it, about processing internally before expressing externally, about choosing when and how to reveal your inner world so that your presence remains a source of stability, not a source of volatility. A man who can feel deeply yet remain composed does not lose polarity. He amplifies it. His restraint does not shut her out. It signals that he is his own foundation. When he does choose to share, his words carry weight because they are not constant noise. They are the distilled outcome of reflection. She can admire a man like that because he does not ask her to carry what he refuses to hold himself. Oversharing kills masculine polarity because it turns emotional honesty into emotional dependency. It takes what should be processed through discipline and hands it to someone else to manage. It confuses intimacy with unloading. And in doing so, it slowly transforms attraction into obligation. The intelligent man learns to reverse this. He does not silence himself out of fear. He refines himself out of respect for his own mind, for her feminine nature, and for the polarity that keeps both of them drawn toward each other instead of drained by each other. Silence, when understood by a disciplined man, becomes more than a moment without words. It becomes leverage, a form of quiet strength that shapes the emotional landscape of any interaction. Most people speak to relieve tension, to fill the void, to soften discomfort, but the man who has trained himself to sit calmly inside that same void learns to use silence as a tool that bends situations in his favor. Where others panic, he observes. Where others reveal themselves, he remains unreadable. Where others rush to respond, he lets the moment unfold until the truth rises on its own. Silence grants leverage because it forces the world to meet you on your terms, rather than pulling you into its urgency. A man who can remain still when provoked, quiet when challenged, and patient when pressured becomes someone who cannot be manipulated easily. People instinctively adjust their behavior in the presence of this calm, as if trying to understand what he is thinking, wondering how he will respond, sensing that he sees more than he says. This imbalance, where others work to decode him while he loses nothing, gives him a strategic advantage without any outward show of force. In conversations, silence becomes frame control. Whoever fills the silence first is usually the one who yields their center. When a man does not rush to explain himself, he signals that he is not seeking permission or approval. When he does not react emotionally, he signals that he chooses his battles. And when he pauses before speaking, he signals that he is guided by intention, not impulse. This steady energy sets the tone for the interaction, and sooner or later, the other person begins to follow his rhythm rather than imposing their own. Psychologically, silence places pressure on the other side, not through aggression, but through the human discomfort with the unknown. People have a natural urge to fill empty space because silence magnifies their inner noise. It amplifies their doubts, exposes their insecurities, and pushes their thoughts toward confession. When you give someone space to speak without interrupting, they often reveal more than they intended. Their motives, their fears, their inconsistencies, their emotional triggers. Silence becomes the light that makes the truth impossible to hide. This is why the first person to break silence in conflict is usually the one who loses. In an argument, the man who speaks first is the one who feels the need to defend his position. The man who waits reveals that he is not threatened. The silence itself becomes a mirror that reflects pressure back at the aggressor. They speak louder, push harder, or stumble into emotional overexposure, all while he remains steady, choosing his timing, watching the dynamic unfold with clarity rather than haste. Eventually, their outburst begins to feel out of place, while his restraint becomes the anchor of the situation. The true power of silence lies in what it communicates without ever needing to be said, that you have control over yourself, that you decide when and how to respond, that your emotions are not dictated by someone else's urgency. A man who possesses this kind of quiet discipline does not need to dominate others. His presence naturally shifts the balance of power. Silence, used with intention, is not passive. It is a form of undisputed command. And the man who learns to wield it becomes someone who influences situations not by force, but by the unwavering steadiness of his inner world. Calm dominance is one of the rarest forms of power a man can possess. It does not shout, it does not demand space, and it does not announce itself with grand gestures. Instead, it radiates outward from a man's inner world, revealing itself through the way he stands, the way he observes, the way he breathes, and the way he refuses to be moved by the noise around him. In a society obsessed with performance, the man who chooses stillness becomes a quiet anomaly, someone who carries strength without display and authority without effort. Stillness is the foundation of this model. It is not merely the absence of movement, but the presence of grounded intention. The Stoic man learns to anchor himself beneath the surface of his emotions so that external circumstances, whether stressful or chaotic, cannot shake his center. His stillness becomes a silent message. He is not controlled by the world. He is controlling the way he moves through it. When he enters a space, his composure speaks long before he does, a slow, steady breath that signals he is not here to react but to observe. Observation is the second pillar of calm dominance. While others rush to speak, to prove, to impress, he listens, not with passive quiet, but with the intent to understand the deeper layers beneath someone's words. He notices tone before he notices sentences. He reads posture before he processes content. He sees motive before he engages with opinion. Because he is not distracted by the need to respond immediately, he has the advantage of clarity. His silence becomes a tool, allowing others to reveal themselves through their own urgency, while he gathers information from a place of control. The Stoics believe that the man who observes more than he speaks will always possess more power, simply because patience uncovers truth faster than pressure ever could. Detachment is the third quality that shapes the Stoic archetype. Detachment does not mean apathy or coldness. It means refusing to be emotionally entangled with every situation, every disagreement, every fluctuation in other people's moods. The calm man engages without absorbing, cares without collapsing, and participates without losing his center. By holding a certain distance between his peace and the world's unpredictability, he becomes someone others instinctively rely on, not because he absorbs their chaos, but because he does not amplify it. His boundaries are quiet but unmistakable, and his energy is steady enough to create stability simply by existing. Control over his inner world is what ties these qualities together. The Stoic man recognizes that the only domain he truly owns is the space between his thoughts and his reactions. While others let irritation, pride, fear, or insecurity dictate their behavior, he filters these emotions through reason before allowing them into expression. This inner governance creates an impression of natural authority. People trust the man who does not lose himself, even in moments where losing control would be easy. His calm is not accidental, it is earned through continuous self-discipline. Finally, strategic speech is the outward manifestation of all these traits. The Stoic man does not speak to fill silence, impress others, or soothe his ego. He speaks when his words serve purpose. His sentences are deliberate, his pauses intentional, his presence amplified not by volume but by precision. When he chooses to speak, the effect is stronger because listeners have learned that he does not waste breath. His words carry weight because they are chosen, not spilled. This is the archetype of the true Stoic way, the man who does not need to prove strength for others to feel it, who communicates more through the steadiness of his posture than through any speech, and whose greatest authority comes not from dominance over others, but from mastery over himself. His presence is a statement. His silence is a boundary. His calm is a throne he never has to defend. Observation is one of the most underrated abilities a man can cultivate, yet it is the foundation of nearly every form of wisdom. To observe is to understand without forcing clarity, to listen without needing to interrupt, to perceive the truth beneath the surface of words and behaviors. Most people believe that communication happens through what is spoken, but the Stoic man understands that real communication unfolds in everything that is left unsaid: the tone, the breath, the hesitation, the way someone shifts when touched by truth, or tightens when attempting to conceal it. To observe people effectively, a man must first quiet his own mind. Observation is impossible when the inner world is filled with noise, assumptions, impulses, judgments, or the desire to respond quickly. The calm man creates mental space for others to reveal themselves. He listens not only to what they say, but to how they say it, allowing their emotional patterns to speak louder than their sentences. Instead of jumping in, he lets the moment breathe. Instead of preparing his reply, he watches for what is emerging. Tone is often the first doorway to understanding. Words may be chosen carefully, but tone betrays what the person truly feels. A slight tremor can expose anxiety. A sudden softness can reveal guilt. A tightness in the voice can uncover defensiveness. Where the average man reacts to the content of sentences, the observant man listens to the emotional frequency beneath them. Body language reveals even more. People communicate constantly through posture, eye movement, hand placement, the way they lean in when engaged or pull away when uncertain. A person's feet often point toward what they desire and away from what they fear. Shoulders drop when trust deepens. Arms cross when resistance rises. The observant man does not stare or analyze in an exaggerated way. He simply remains present enough to let these signals register naturally. Then there are the micro-reactions, the fleeting expressions that last less than a second yet contain more truth than minutes of conversation. A flash of surprise, a tightening around the eyes, a brief frown swallowed by a polite smile. These micro-reactions appear when the mind processes something emotionally before it has time to craft a socially acceptable response. When a man is silent and attentive, these tiny moments become unmistakably clear. This is why silence reveals more than questions ever could. Questions guide people towards specific answers, often filtered and rehearsed. Silence, however, leaves them alone with their own thoughts. And in that space, they begin to fill the void with whatever they are trying to hide, explain, justify, or convince themselves of. Silence does not pressure them, it gives them room. And in that room, their inner truth slips out on its own. If you stay silent long enough, people expose themselves. Not because you cornered them, but because most people are uncomfortable with unfilled space. They reveal motives in their attempts to justify, reveal insecurities in their attempts to impress. reveal inconsistencies in their attempts to explain. The man who observes understands this dynamic deeply. He knows that silence is the most reliable pathway to clarity. Observation allows a man to choose his responses strategically. Instead of reacting emotionally, he reacts intelligently. Instead of speaking from impulse, he speaks from insight. And instead of being moved by the surface of situations, he responds from a place of genuine understanding. A man who observes becomes impossible to manipulate because he sees the intention beneath the gesture. He becomes hard to deceive because he listens to what people avoid saying. And he becomes naturally respected because his calm attention makes others feel both seen and measured. Observation is not a passive skill. It is a disciplined practice. Through silence, presence, and careful attention, a man gains access to truths that noise will never allow him to hear. Detachment is one of the most misunderstood qualities of the Stoic man. Many mistake it for emotional coldness or a lack of heart, imagining a distant figure who feels nothing, cares for nothing, and approaches life with a rigid indifference. But true Stoic detachment is nothing of that sort. It is not an absence of feeling, but a mastery over feeling. Not a withdrawal from the world, but freedom within it. Not a rejection of love, but a way of loving with strength instead of fear. Detachment is the quiet superpower that allows a man to remain centered regardless of what he gains or what he loses, because his peace is anchored within, not scattered across the shifting movements of the external world. To understand detachment, one must first understand what it is protecting a man from. Emotional manipulation does not always come in the form of malice or intentional harm. Sometimes it happens through unregulated expression, through someone else's anxiety entering your space, through their moods pulling you into storms you never created. When a man is attached in the unhealthy sense, when his emotional state depends on someone else's approval, validation, attention, or affection, he becomes reactive rather than grounded, responsive rather than stable, pulled rather than anchored. In this state, anyone can disrupt his center simply by shaking the foundation he has built on them. Detachment prevents this collapse. It creates a gap between stimulus and reaction, between what happens externally and what he allows to take root internally. It gives him the ability to love someone deeply without allowing that love to dictate his emotional equilibrium. He can care without becoming consumed. He can give without surrendering his center. He can invest without losing himself. This is why Stoic detachment is not coldness, it is strength. Coldness numbs connection, but detachment refines it. Coldness pushes people away, but detachment allows closeness without fear. Coldness builds walls, but detachment builds boundaries, and boundaries are not barriers to intimacy. They are the structure that allows intimacy to exist without dissolving identity. A detached man in love is not distant. He is present in a way that feels steady, calm, and reliable. He listens without absorbing another's emotional chaos. He supports without collapsing into their overwhelm. He cares without needing constant reassurance in return. Because he is not afraid of losing someone, he is able to offer a kind of love that is clean, not suffocating, not needy, not tangled in expectation, but offered freely from a place of abundance rather than scarcity. This is why detachment makes love stronger, not weaker. People often believe that attachment equals depth, that dependence equals passion, that obsession equals devotion. But none of these qualities create healthy or lasting connection. They create emotional volatility. They breed insecurity. They shape relationships in which love becomes conditional, unpredictable, and fragile. True love requires stability, and stability requires a form of detachment, the ability to remain whole even when deeply connected. Love without dependence is love offered from wholeness rather than lack. It is the recognition that another person can enrich your life without becoming the source of your identity. It is a love that says, I choose you, but I am not defined by you. I care for you, but I remain responsible for myself. I walk with you, but I do not collapse into you. Connection without obsession is connection that breathes, that evolves, that matures. Obsession suffocates, it clings. It fears abandonment at every turn. But connection rooted in detachment trusts the bond rather than policing it. It allows distance without insecurity and closeness without losing proportion. It knows that two complete individuals form a stronger partnership than two incomplete ones seeking to fill each other as voids. Giving without losing oneself is the final expression of mature love. Men who lack detachment often give too quickly, too fully, too desperately, offering their time, their attention, their emotional resources, even their self-worth in exchange for affection. But a man who practices detachment gives with precision, with presence, and with a sense of proportion. His generosity is not a sacrifice of identity, but an extension of it. He gives because he chooses to, not because he fears what will happen if he doesn't. Detachment is the superpower that allows a man to move through life and love with strength. It protects his inner world from being shaped by forces outside of his control. It allows him to remain loyal without becoming dependent, romantic without becoming needy, strong without becoming rigid. And most importantly, it gives him the ability to love fully, not because he clings, but because he is free. Discipline is the quiet architecture of a man's life, the unseen structure that determines who he becomes long before the world realizes what he is capable of. While most men wait for emotion to move them, the disciplined man understands that emotion is a wave, not a compass. It rises, falls, and shifts without warning. If he were to depend on motivation for movement, he would wander through life in circles. Instead, he chooses a different foundation: routine over emotion, systems over inspiration, consistency over intensity. He knows that greatness is not built in moments of excitement, but in the countless mornings when no one is watching and no applause is waiting. Routine is what separates the man who hopes from the man who becomes. The disciplined man does not negotiate with his feelings. He negotiates with his standards. He wakes when he says he will wake, works when he says he will work, and moves forward regardless of whether his emotions are aligned with his ambition. He treats discipline not as punishment, but as a form of self-respect, a promise he makes to himself every day. A promise that says, "My actions are not controlled by the weather inside my mind." Systems give him freedom. They offer structure to the chaos of life and stability to the uncertainty of human emotion. While others wait for the right mood, the disciplined man relies on the habits he has crafted with intention. He builds systems that operate regardless of his current emotional state. Training, studying, planning, reflecting, these are not tasks he performs when convenient, but rituals he has woven into the rhythm of his life. His discipline becomes a sanctuary he can enter at any moment, a place where progress is inevitable because the process itself is designed to move him forward. Quiet discipline is far more powerful than loud ambition. Ambition shouts, announces, and performs. Discipline whispers, acts, and delivers. The world is filled with men who talk about their goals with conviction, yet fail to take the smallest step toward them once the excitement wears off. Loud ambition is often a mask for insecurity, a desperate attempt to appear driven while lacking the consistency to prove it. The disciplined man does not need to broadcast his intentions because he is too busy executing them. His results become his voice, and his silence becomes his credibility. This is why the loudest men are rarely the strongest, only the most insecure. Noise is the language of those who lack inner certainty. They speak of what they want to do instead of doing it. They explain what they plan to accomplish instead of building it quietly. They look outward for validation instead of inward for direction. But the disciplined man has no need for external confirmation. His direction comes from within, and his validation comes from the integrity of honoring his own word. True power is built privately, in the moments that seem small and unremarkable to others. It grows in the early hours of the morning, in the long stretches of focused work, in the repeated acts of self-control that no one applauds. It strengthens silently, each disciplined choice reinforcing the next, creating a momentum that does not depend on moods or circumstances. The disciplined man understands that the world will see his greatness only after he has already forged it in solitude. He does not chase greatness, he prepares for it. He does not talk about discipline, he embodies it. His strength comes not from intensity, but from repetition, not from passion, but from consistency, not from noise, but from quiet, deliberate action. And as the world watches men burn out on their own unsustained ambition, the disciplined man rises steadily, not loudly, not dramatically, but inevitably. His power is not in what he promises, but in what he executes. His legacy is not written in declarations, but in the habits he builds, the work he honors, and the man he becomes when no one is there to witness it. In the end, every man walks through life carrying two worlds, the outer world that demands his attention, and the inner world that demands his mastery. The majority spend their lives reacting to the outer world, pulled by noise, bent by pressure, shaped by opinions. But a rare kind of man learns to reverse this direction. He becomes guided not by what surrounds him, but by what steadies him. He learns to root himself so deeply in his own presence that the turbulence of life loses its ability to dictate the rhythm of his soul. And the moment he learns to control his silence, he learns to control his life. Silence, when understood fully, is not an absence of expression. It is the essence of inner authority. It is the calm breath that steadies a storm, the deliberate pause that transforms reaction into intention, the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you do not need to prove what is already true. A man who stands inside this silence does not shrink from the world. He rises above it. He becomes someone who cannot be easily moved because he has learned not to be moved by impulse, noise, or the emotional chaos of others. Mystery emerges naturally from this discipline, not as a tactic and not as manipulation, but as a reflection of a man who no longer bleeds his thoughts into every conversation or spills his emotions at every moment of tension. His mystery is not artificial, it is earned. It is the quiet depth of someone who has explored his inner world long enough to understand himself, but reveals his truth only when it serves purpose. The world may try to interpret him, to categorize him, to decode him, but he remains just outside the grasp of those who rely on surface-level perception. His presence speaks louder than his explanations, and his restraint carries more authority than any performance. There is a profound truth hidden within this form of mystery. Mystery is not manipulation, it is mastery. Mastery over impulse. Mastery over ego. Mastery over the constant craving to be seen, understood, and validated. A man who has mastered himself no longer needs validation from others to feel grounded, for he has learned to validate himself through discipline, through stillness, through the integrity of keeping his own word. As he grows into this inner power, something remarkable begins to happen. People no longer approach him the way they approach ordinary men. They feel his steadiness even before he speaks. They sense his depth even before he shares. They recognize that he is not someone who will be swept away by flattery or shaken by criticism. He becomes untouchable, not because he is feared, but because he is anchored. This form of untouchability is not hard or rigid. It is not the cold armor worn by men afraid of being hurt. Instead, it is the quiet sovereignty of someone who knows exactly who he is. He does not harden to survive, he steadies to lead. He does not close his heart. He protects it. He does not withdraw from life. He moves through it with deliberate steps, selecting his battles wisely, investing his energy intentionally, and speaking only when his words carry purpose. And this is what separates him from the restless, reactive world. His silence is not emptiness, it is intelligence. His restraint is not weakness, it is refinement. His calm is not passivity, it is strength held in perfect alignment. In a culture that rewards noise, the silent man becomes the exception. People remember him not for what he says, but for what they feel in his presence. He holds frame without trying. He commands attention without effort. He influences without force, and he leads not by dominating others, but by mastering himself. As the journey of the Stoic man reaches its final lesson, one truth remains above all others. The ascent of a man begins the moment he stops trying to be everything for others and starts becoming everything within himself. Power does not come from shouting. Authority does not come from explanation. Respect does not come from performance. The true ascent happens quietly, in the private places where discipline sharpens character, where restraint strengthens clarity, and where silence shapes the man he is destined to become. So let this be the closing message of your path, the signature of the true Stoic way. Let silence be your confidence and restraint your royalty. Let your calm be the loudest thing in the room, and let your presence speak what your words no longer need to. If you've reached this point, it means something inside you recognizes this calling, the desire to rise above noise, to master your inner world, to walk with the steadiness of a man who is no longer shaped by the chaos around him. If you choose silence as your strength, type below, "I choose discipline." And if this path speaks to you, the path of calm, clarity, and inner power, subscribe and join the brotherhood of men who rise not through noise, but through mastery. This is the way, the true Stoic way.